Hey everybody. Last time I got the in the animations I got like the pause working and where you could sort of move through and see what's happening. And that was pretty useful. And as you can see, we can make kind of cool stuff. And I think at this point it's kind of it is time to formalize the animations. We have been steadily the last few days, the last few days I've been steadily formalizing this, and now it's time to take it to another level of formalization. Um, Obviously, a property of these animated items need to be able to move in a very controlled way, from where they start to where they end, and then they need to be some of them need to be animated, some of them don't, and we actually will probably need another property to describe the type of animation, whether it's like a linear animation or a curved animation, exponential animation, that kind of stuff. And that's going to be really cool because it's been a long time since I've done any of that kind of stuff. But, anyways, there's another tiny step forward in that process. I did want to mention that there is, and I'm just going to keep mentioning this until I do the upgrade. There is a new Angular version, minor version out that I need to upgrade. And along with that, sort of probably what's I would guess is going to be a new best practice on doing outputs. They did, I think, believe in the last upgrade, they did a best practice on the way you do inputs into components. And then this version, they've done a change in the way you do outputs. They are shying away from RxJS. I honestly have absolutely no idea why. It is, this is always hard. This sort of thing is always very difficult because anybody who is like been coding for a couple years with Angular has spent a tremendous amount of time learning RxJS. So it's tough when they decide to do whatever they're doing with RxJS right now, but it kind of looks like RxJS is not long for this world. Um, so that's going to be a bummer that I spent all that time, but that's the way it is. And yeah, I'll probably whenever I do the upgrade, which should be soon, I'll do a bunch more ranting about why you should keep up with your upgrades, what the whole point of Angular is, and if you're not going to up with your upgrades, then there's really no point to doing Angular, in my personal opinion. That is truly a personal opinion. Um, anyways, back to what we're doing. There is, I did want to also do another sort of talk on. I've noticed that like legit developers, people who come in and they really do know how to code, they have that natural gift of software development, sort of go through a process of it, like as a junior developer where they're just so paranoid, right? Like every step take take is just feels like a final exam to them. And then they sort of kind of go into like a early middling level where they become insanely confident and cocky and are ready. And it's always a real shame when someone gets sort of promoted at that point, and a lot of people do get promoted just as they enter into their cocky phase where they haven't really been they haven't gone through the trials and trib, tribulations of getting sort of beat down. Let me do this. Then they sort of start to go into like a senior middling where they start to get very nervous about very specific things. And one of the first things that you'll see them get very nervous about is the way you name things. And it's because the way you name things in some contexts is incredibly important, and sometimes it's not. And now that I'm entering into this, and then let me just finish that thought. And then you kind of go into the senior where you're almost like a junior again, where like every step is like some has to be incredibly well thought out because you realize the consequences, the long-term consequences of every decision you make as a software developer are incredibly like impactful to you and all your friends. So that is the sort of arc that I think most developers go through. I think it typically takes about anywhere from 3 to 5 years for the developer to sort of get to that senior level where they're um, back into the, oh my gosh, I have to be really careful. Now there, I'm just going to end it there. There's more things going on with that, in my opinion. But anyways, at this point, when I was working on this animation stuff, I was like, man, um, I need to really be careful because I want to work on this animation stuff for like the next 10 years. And the way I name this could make this a misery, literally a day-to-day misery, and make me want to avoid the whole animations area. Or it can make it like empowering, like, oh, I feel good every time I go in there, I'm saying these words that make me feel strong and all that. And I put a lot of thought in it and finally came up with animation property descriptor. So this is, I feel like I could say those words, they roll off my mouth, my tongue really well, and I could say them, and I feel like the words describe what it does, and they feel good. So an animation property descriptor has a start value, an end value, and it's animated or not animated. So it could apply to any property, right? It could be the color, it could be the position, it could be the rotation. All those things um, are can be described as an animation property descriptor. So that was the very first thing that I did for this change. Um, so in order, and I did just make this change, and then I added this interface, and then I went into the 3JS. And then I have another interface, I believe. Yeah, the mesh interface, and I changed just the X position to an animation property descriptor, and I just waited for all hell to break loose. All of these, like the X position, the Y position, um, maybe the name, probably not. May uh, does that make sense for a name? Yeah, start value could be um, that it starts off as a box geometry and ends as a sphere geometry. Um, so that may end up being the red color. All the colors will probably end up being animation property descriptors. The blue, the height, the depth, the radius. I don't think cast shadows. It could, uh, but I don't think cast shadows will receive shadows. But maybe you get to a certain point and then it starts casting the shadows, or receiving the shadows. But anyways, that is that. And so I once I made that change, it immediately broke in here. Um, or yeah, no, it immediately broke all throughout the rest of this thing. Where this didn't break, but I needed to update the form so that it doesn't so it shows a start value, because that's what you're going to be editing in here is just the start value, not the full. So this is where it starts. This is not where it ends. And in here, I made it the end value is 2. So all of these guys here, let me go back to animations and make this like a 1 second animation. They're all just moving to the 2 positions. So some of them are starting off over in the +4, some of them started off at negative or +6, -4, and they're all moving into the 2 to the 2 position on X. Eventually that will be configurable, so that you can say where it's starting, where it's ending. Um, so let me go back to this guy. I had to make changes so that the form gets the start position. Um, oh, that was okay. So that's in the XML, in the HTML. So basically, instead of showing the X position, which just shows up as an object, that shows up properly now. Then we have to read it properly, form what it's going to show. So when we go over here and we go to the form, the X position is that. So like let's just for funsies make this like -8, and so you can kind of see what it's doing. And so now everywhere you go, so it speeds up, it slows down depending on how far it has to go. And then finally we have our start value on the update form. Um, the X position start value is what gets set for the form, the active form. Not so. So now the X position used to be a one-to-one map with the mesh item X position, but now it's a 1-1 map with the X position start value. So there goes my alarm. This is probably going to be long because for two reasons. One, I think it's important, and two, I did a long rant at the beginning about some stuff. And then three, it is Sunday, which for you is Friday. So that's awesome. Happy Friday. Uh, Now, toolbox component. Okay, I did make that obvious change where I basically made the mesh at the beginning because when I'm setting these up, it's a little easier to start with the mesh at the beginning. And then in the service, it's probably the most interesting stuff. So our first change is in the update mesh. Instead of we set the whenever you do an update, all we do is change the start value, right? So that's what I demonstrated a second ago. So if I change that to 0, now the start value is 0. Doesn't affect the end value. And then down here, the speed. So now we calculate the speed based on stuff, right? Like if we're animated, then the speed is there, but if we're not animated, the speed is 0. So basically, if you look at the set X, basically it's going to end up at the start value because this is going to end up at 0 no matter what the time is if we're not animated. But if we are animated, then the speed is going to be the difference between the end value and the start value and the amount of time that it's going to take to get there. So if it had to go real far, so let's see, we should be able to like make this like a -100. And when it comes in, when it finally gets here, it's going to be flying because it has to travel 100 units before to get to where it's supposed to get. So that's how that works. And I think and I'm console logging, so let's go ahead and and that's probably not even of any value at this point. Actually, let me just get rid of that now. There was a little bit where I had to tweak around with this stuff to get this formula right. Man, this would have been cool in college to have for demos and stuff. But I think this tool is becoming pretty cool. The things that are like tech debt, right? I guess it is just legit tech debt right now. Is we are one minor version behind, and I am planning to be working on this in 10 years. So if you have an Angular 5 application right now, and the code is weird as hell, and Angular 17 is so much better than Angular 5, but trying to make that jump from Angular 5 to Angular 17 is, especially if it's a really big code base, is probably not reasonable. You probably won't be able to do it unless you can find, like, if there's some people that work on like that's really all they do, then I think your chances of being able to get that done is possible, but I think it's very unlikely. Probably you'd be way better off rebuilding from scratch. So yeah, sorry, I'm the messenger, but it's easy for me to be the messenger right now. A lot of times when I'm working at places, it's not so easy. The other major piece of tech debt is this service is just getting way too big. It's it's 9 lines in my mind away from being too big. So it's actually well sized at the moment, but we're headed there, and that is a task that will just get harder and harder to do. Very, very soon I need to address both of those issues, and it's not going to be fun because you're not going to be able to build cool stuff during that time of these sort of circling back times. So, but it's super important to do. And the point I was making is in 10 years, I want to be working on this. And it's already weird to go from Angular 5 to Angular 17. It already feels like you're working on some very antiquated thing if you have to go look back at an Angular 5 application. But on Angular imagine what the gap will be between Angular 17 and in, let's say, 10 years, we'll have what, 20 more versions of Angular. And so that'll be Angular 17 to Angular 37. Like, it'll be completely undoable. And there will probably be at least one or two versions where it's, even for this application, it won't be reasonable to upgrade it. It'll make a lot more sense um, to build a new one and all that. And when I do that, it'll be a lot easier to import these services than it's going to be to import this sort of thing, like code in here. Code in here is going to be much, much more difficult to import because they're likely to change. Like, the things where you see a lot of changes is in, like, in here in these decorators. I mean, there may not even be decorators, right? Like, if you look at the um, common components and the color picker, for example, um, if I had have built one of these in Angular 2, these would be at inputs, just like this. Now I'm going to need to do an upgrade, and I'm going to be getting rid of these at outputs. It wouldn't surprise me if by Angular 25, this isn't even supported anymore. And if someone sees this in some old code, it's just code, they're gonna be like, what the heck even is that? Like, you'll be looking on Stack Overflow and nobody will be talking about this anymore. So keeping up is super important. And Angular, the one thing about Angular is that they do keep up and they stay up with the times. This decorator kind of thing, creating these event emitters and all that stuff with RxJS, somehow they have deemed that that's no longer the direction they want to go in. And it's probably so that their framework can stay relevant. And they've gone to this, which honestly, like, if you're looking at it, I think probably looks a lot cleaner. That probably looks a lot cleaner than that. If you came at these two from a like you hadn't ever seen either before, and you had to choose between these two, you probably would, especially if you knew that, hey, I'm going to create a required field. Like, red value is required if you want to use this. That wasn't even technically feasible with the decorators. So, anyways, yeah, it is Sunday, so it was a long post, and I talked about a lot of different stuff. Next is going to be I'm not actually sure. It seems like it makes sense. I So next, I think I'm going to. So I had originally thought that I was going to show, like, the um, I was going to show the position and have like a slider in here for animations, and I just don't think that makes sense. I think what makes more sense is to have an animation and then be able to see all the data, and you already have this slider and you can see where things are at certain points um, in the process, and then you can see the actual values in here. And then I think the place that we want to do that is update all the different properties. So is going to be in this animations page, not on the mesh page, because mesh is already getting overwhelmed, and there's a lot of different things happening over there. But I think it makes a lot of sense to be able to edit. And it seems like what we want is two different ways. One where you can kind of see them all the way we see them here, where you see them all together and you can interact with them all together, and then a way that you can see it by property. So, like, you can say, oh, I just want to see the X properties, and they're all together, but it's all the X's by mesh, where I want to see where everything is. And so I think there's a very, very good chance that this view altogether is going to be gone, and that all we'll have is this view over here, because I don't see any reason to have this view if all the animation stuff is going to be on the animation page. And if that is the case, then this is a very perfect example of like I had this bug where when I come here, this stays open. Well, I don't even need to fix that bug because this thing is not long for this world. It's probably going to be gone, this view. So it's a bug for something that's not even going to exist in the future. So tech debt is a funny thing, and it's not necessarily always worth addressing. And that's like, I know that's like sacrilegious, but anyways, that's a great way to end on a Friday. Happy coding, everybody. Bye.